In order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or a repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we are dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you? And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down.
All right. Want to welcome everybody today for tuning in, episode 12. I made a mistake last week and I said the wrong number episode, so this week I wanted to make sure I get it right. So we're on episode 12 today, and we're going to talk about the history of law enforcement and police brutality in America. So we're going to get right into it because we got a lot of information today, so I don't really want to go off on tangents, talking. I got a lot of information, so we're going to get right into it. All right, first screen, Paul. Now, police. What does the word mean, right? I from the very first show, I explained to you that a lot of power is in words, right? And the word police is no different than any other word, right? So let's look at the root, the etymology of the word police. 1530s, it meaning the regulation and control of a community. That's interesting, right? Similar in sense to the word policy. From Middle French, police, meaning organized government, civil administration, late 15th century. From the Latin word politia, civil administration. From the Greek root word polis, which means city. Okay? So right at the beginning, right at the very root of what it is to be, what it is to define as a police is the regulation and control of a community, right? This is the term that was put in the 15th century, right? So before America even existed, the whole concept of the word police was the regulation and control of a community. Okay. So now we're going to look at
that's the whole point of a city.
Right.
At the end definition of the root.
Right. So the city, the aspect, the urban aspect of it is embedded into the word itself. Right. Now we're going to get into the history of the police and law enforcement here in America, right? Because it's bigger than just the word police. It's the law enforcement as a whole. This includes prosecution. This includes the judicial system, right? This includes all the elements that make the police officers are just one small part of law enforcement, right? The prosecutors, the judges, the COs and the institutions, right? The wardens, these are all one big area of law enforcement. So we got to see where does this come from? Where does this idea, right, come from?
When you get a ticket, it's called a citation. City is in the front of it.
So these first couple articles I'm going to be getting into. This first article is from Time Magazine that they wrote about 3 years ago, and the title of the article is called "How the U.S. Got Its Police Force." So we're gonna go. We're gonna go through this article. We're gonna look at some of the points they make in this article, and then we're gonna investigate. So, starting off, it says it would be easy to think that the police officer is a figure who has existed since the beginning of civilization. That's the idea on display in the proclamation from President John F. Kennedy on the dedication of the week of May 15th as National Police Week, in which he noted that law enforcement officers had been protecting Americans since the nation's birth. In fact, the U.S. police force is a relatively modern invention, sparked by changing notions of public order, driven in turn by economics and politics, according to Gary Potter, a crime historian at Eastern Kentucky University. Policing in colonial America had been very informal, based on a for-profit, privately funded system that employed people part-time. Towns also commonly relied on a night watch, in which volunteers signed up for a certain day and time, mostly to look out for fellow colonists engaging in prostitution or gambling. Boston started one in 1636, New York followed in 1658, and Philadelphia created one in 1700. But that system wasn't very efficient because the watchmen often slept and drank while on duty, and there were people who were put on watch duty as a form of punishment. So, looking at the early formation, right? Before I continue getting a little deeper, let's analyze these first couple paragraphs, right? The early idea of police in colonial America was basically like volunteers, right? They would pay some of the guys in the neighborhoods to come out and make sure nobody was gambling or nobody was spending money on prostitutes. But the problem was a lot of these dudes were the ones spending money on prostitutes and gambling, right? So it was kind of like a conflict of interest, right? You're hiring the pigs to watch the pig pen type of thing. So they needed to develop a more comprehensive system where they were able to filter out the degenerates that were finding their way into the policing force, right? Night watch officers were supervised by constables, but that wasn't exactly a highly sought after job either. Early policemen didn't want to wear badges because these guys had bad reputations to begin with, and they didn't want to be identified as people that other people didn't like. When localities tried compulsory service, meaning volunteer, this is like mandating people to work, right? If you were rich enough, you paid somebody to do it for you. Ironically, a criminal or a community thug. So again, even back then, police officers weren't as proud as their badges as they are now, right? Because even back then, people didn't like the concept of police officer telling them what to do, right, and regulating their movements and infringing upon their perceived civil liberties, right? So a lot of people that were police officers back in the day hid that, right? Or if you had money, you just paid somebody else to go do the service for you. So like at one time, being a police officer was almost like the military, where at a certain age, you would get volunteered and then you had to be on the night watch for a certain amount of time. Well, if your family had money, you could spend money and you ain't even have to do this. So even back then, people that had money, right, people that found themselves in positions of affluency, right, were able to buy their way out of personal responsibility in their communities. And they would invest the money. They would go hire the thugs, right? The criminals, they were the ones that they would go hire to go in their place. Continuing on. As the nation grew, however, different regions made use of different policing systems. In the cities, increasing urbanization rendered the night watch system completely useless as communities got too big. The first publicly funded organized police force with officers on duty full-time was created in Boston in 1838. Boston was a large shipping commercial center, and businesses had been hiring people to protect their property and safeguard the transport of goods from the port of Boston to other places. These merchants came up with a way to save money by transferring to the cause of maintaining a police force to citizens by arguing that it was for the collective good, right? So they realized that by having an organized police force, they can use these police force almost like their personal bodyguards, right? We need to get our merchandise from the ports to the stores to the businesses. So what better way to do this than have it under the protection of an organized police force, right? In the South, however, the economics that drove the creation of police forces was centered not on the protection of shipping interests, but on the preservation of the slavery system. Some of the primary policing institutions that were the slave patrols tasked with chasing down runaways and preventing slave revolts. The first formal slave patrol had been created in the Carolina colonies in 1704. So, this is almost 120 years before the first organized police force, right? And Boston is organized in 1838. We have in 1704 the first official slave patrol, right? And what was the purpose of these slave patrols? The slave patrols' purpose was to go around rounding up slaves that left the plantations, right? And bring them back to the plantations. And they walked around with the badge, right? See if we can find a picture. They walked around with the badge, the same badge that the sheriffs use to this day, right? All right, you can bring my screen up real quick. So we see here, this looks exactly like the sheriff. It's exactly the same thing. This is a modern day deputy sheriff, Los Angeles County sheriff's badge, right? And this is a runaway slave patrol badge. And you can clearly see that the symbol is basically the same, right? The 6-point the hexagram star, right? And this is how they do it. So we see that the police force in its at its very creation was rooted in control, right? Regulation, protection of industry, and making sure that slaves are kept under control, right? Make sure that slavery and those that they perceived as slavery were kept under control. So now we're going to continue on. During the Civil War, the military became the primary form of law enforcement in the South. But during Reconstruction, many local sheriffs functioned in a way analogous to the earlier slave patrols, enforcing segregation and the disenfranchisement of free slaves. So martial law was already in effect. During the Civil War, martial law was in effect, and after the Civil War, right, during Reconstruction, they ran the same scheme, right? They made sure that, they used the same principles that they had. And where did these principles come from, right? In general, throughout the 19th century and beyond, the definition of public order, that which the police officer was charged with maintaining, depended on whom it was asked. For example, businessmen in the late 19th century had both connections to politicians and an image of the kinds of people most likely to go on strike and disrupt their workforce. So it's no coincidence that by the late 1880s, all major U.S. cities had police forces. Fears of labor union organizers and of large waves of Catholic, Irish, Italian, German, and Eastern European immigrants who looked and acted differently from the people who had dominated the cities before drove for the call for the preservation of law and order, or at least a version of it promoted by dominant interests, right? So now they expanded their control even further out. Now it didn't even encompass only black people, right? It encompassed anybody that wasn't a naturalized American, right? This encompassed all type of Irish Americans, German Americans, right? Italian. A lot of people don't know this, but a large majority of the soldiers that fought in the Civil War for the North were immigrants, right? Almost 300, 400,000 Germans died in the Civil War. And we don't never talk about this, right? We have this assumption that it was American people dying, right, to free and end the institution of slavery in America. And in reality, it was immigrants that came over here that were taken advantage of by the government. So what's going on? All right. So moving forward. For example, people who drank at taverns rather than at home were seen as dangerous people by others. But they might have pointed out other factors such as how living in a smaller home makes drinking in a tavern more appealing.
Click in the window. Other go away. Click there. No. Yeah, click. Yeah.
Okay. My bad, excuse me. For example, people who drank at taverns rather than at home were seen as dangerous people by others, but they may have pointed out other factors such as how living in a smaller home makes drinking in a tavern more appealing. The irony of this logic, Pointer points out, is that the businessmen who maintained this belief were often the ones who profited off the commercial sale of alcohol in public places. At the same time, the late 19th century was the era of political machines. So police captains and sergeants for each precinct were often picked by the local political party ward leader, who often owned taverns and ran street gangs that intimidated voters. Then they were able to use police to harass opponents of that particular political party or provide payoffs for officers to turn a blind eye to allow illegal drinking, gambling, and prostitution. Okay, so a lot of us, right? A lot of us that remember the Roaring Twenties, right? The Al Capone eras. We always see these images of corrupt police officers, right? But this was a reality. This is not just. This wasn't. The mob was able to pay the police officers more money than the city was, right? So a lot of the organized crime and the street gangs used the police as personal protection, right? A lot of these guys that own these speakeasies, right? They pushed for the creation of police forces because they wanted to use those police officers to protect their businesses, right? So I've already been reading for like 10 minutes, and nowhere in any of this that I read that it says that the people, any of this was for the protection of the common citizen, right? And the common person, right? Everything is about industrial protection, right?
Yeah, right.
Protection of the policy, of the government, of the political party, right? All these things that are made and put in place to control society.
Property.
Yep. So, this situation was exacerbated during Prohibition, leading President Hoover to appoint the Wickersham Commission in 1929 to investigate the ineffectiveness of law enforcement nationwide. To make police independent from political party war leaders, the map of police precincts were changed so that they would not correspond with political wards. So, police corruption got so bad, right, at one point that they had to figure out a way to separate these police sergeants and these police lieutenants from their political sectors, right? So what did this do, right? Now you have people that are not from the communities working these communities, right? So this leads to a whole different set of problems now. So this is just, I'm going to get into a little bit deeper now, right? So this next article is the original source article for the last article that I read, and this is called The History of Policing in the United States, written by Dr. Gary Potter, right? And this was the source article for the article that I just read. This was the source article. So this article, we're going to get a little bit deeper into some of the points that the Time article didn't mention. You got to understand, Time article is a mainstream magazine, so they only allowed to reveal so much information without looking biased one way or the other, right? But when people are writing their own personal papers, they're able to reveal a little bit more. So we're going to get into it. All right. See where let me find my spots. Okay, right here. The key question, of course, is what was it about the United States in the 1830s that necessitated the development of local, centralized, bureaucratic police forces? One answer is that cities were growing. The United States was no longer a collection of small cities and rural hamlets. Urbanization was occurring at an ever-quickening pace, and old informal watch and constable system was no longer adequate to control disorder. Anecdotal accounts suggest increasing crime and vice in urban centers. Mob violence, particularly violence directed at immigrants and African Americans by white youths, occurred with some frequency. Okay? Public disorder, mostly public drunkenness and sometimes prostitution, was more visible and less easily controlled in growing urban centers than it had been in rural villages. But evidence of an actual crime wave is lacking. So if the modern American police force was not a direct response to crime, then what was it a response to, right? So they're telling you here in this article that the modern police force wasn't created as a response to crime, right? Crime was there, but it was more about controlling the growing populations and the urbanizations of these modern cities. It had nothing to do with stopping crime. It was about controlling crime.
Yep.
Stopping crime and controlling crime are two different things. And that's one thing that we don't understand, right? We have expectations for the police officers that their job is to stop crime. Their job is not to stop crime. It's to control crime and make sure that it doesn't spill over and affect the agenda and the policy of the government. More than crime, modern police forces in the United States emerged as a response to disorder. What constitutes social and public order depends largely on who is defining those terms. And in the cities of 19th century America, they were defined by the mercantile interests who, through taxes and political influence, supported the development of bureaucratic policing institutions. Point blank, period. Okay? Policing institutions were created to support the agendas of the people in power. It's here plain as day. Okay? I'm not making this up, right? I'm not pulling this out of my ass. I'm not making this up sitting in my grandma's basement. I'm right here looking at a peer-reviewed paper, right, from a public university telling you that the police force was created to protect the agendas of the governing bodies. Let me continue on. These economic interests had a greater interest in social control than crime control. Let me repeat that phrase again for the people in the back. These economic interests had a greater interest in social control than crime control. Private and for-profit policing was too disorganized and too crime-specific and formed to fulfill these needs. The emerging commercial elites needed a mechanism to ensure a stable and orderly workforce, a stable and orderly environment for the conduct of business, and the maintenance of what they referred to as the collective good. These mercantile interests also wanted to divest themselves of the cost of protecting their own enterprises, transferring these costs from the private sector to the state, okay? So let me give you an example of how this works, okay? I own a business, right? My business makes $1 million, okay? In order for me to protect my business, I would have to hire private security, right?
Okay.
I would have to hire private security that's going to come out of my initial profit, right? I don't have to do that anymore. Now I can use the police force to work as my private security, and that payment is subsidized by the state or the local government, right? All I have to do is make sure I send some money over to the political party and make sure that he gets elected next term. And he makes sure that the police look after all my interests. Again, this is not about protecting the common people, right? This is about protecting the mercantile investors, the people that are investing money into the community. Right? The common person, the most average person is not really investing that much. You can't get anybody elected. That's why the police are not protecting you. It's really that simple. You don't have that influence in the community to get somebody elected, so the police are not protecting you. Right? Now go to a suburban community where there's affluent people there. You can't even drive in a gated community because right away the police will be there to intercept you and make sure that you don't even get access to that. Right?
Yeah.
Let's continue on.
What's your business here?
Right. What's your business? What's your policy here? Let's continue on. Maintaining a stable and disciplined workforce for the developing system of factory production and ensuring a safe and tranquil community for the conduct of commerce required an organized system of social control. The developing profit-based system, let me repeat that, the developing profit, right? And we talked about profit is the underlying word that they underlined the first day of business school, profit-based system of production antagonized social tensions in the community. Inequality was increasingly rapidly. The exploitation of workers and the dominance of local governments by economic elites was creating political unrest. The only effective political strategy available to exploited workers was what economic elites referred to as rioting, which was actually a primitive form of what would become union strikes against employers. The modern police force not only provided an organized, centralized body of men, and they were all male, legally authorized to use force to maintain order, it also provided the illusion that this order was being maintained under the rule of law, not at the whim of those with economic power. Okay? So let me clarify that. What they're saying is that the police force, law enforcement has always used the idea of law to hide the fact that they are working for the agenda and the policy of the ruling elite. It's really that simple, right? This is why law enforcement encompasses also the prosecutors, also the judges, right? And they all work together to ensure that order, right, how they perceive order needs to be, is maintained in order to make sure business and everything is running smoothly, right? Defining social control as crime control was accomplished by raising the specter of the dangerous classes. The suggestion that public drunkenness, crime, hooliganism, political protests, and worker riots were the products of a biologically inferior, morally intemperate, unskilled, and uneducated underclass. The consumption of alcohol was widely seen as the major cause of crime and public disorder. Right?
Yep.
So they already knew back then that if you make alcohol legal, right, and you spread alcohol around to all the communities and let people drink as much as they want without any type of regulation, that it was going to cause crime and it was going to cause disorder, right? But without crime and disorder, there would be no need for a police force, right? So you see how the Hegelian dialectic is working here, right? To ensure that job security is put in place for generation after generation, right? Let's continue. The irony, of course, is that public drunkenness didn't exist until mercantile and commercial interests created venues for and encouraged the commercial sale of alcohol in public places, right? This is just what I was telling you. There wouldn't be no need to arrest people for public drunkenness if you wasn't selling liquor in public.
Right. Should be in private.
It should be in private, right? But what they did was they needed to create an environment conducive for the necessity to create these police forces, right? This underclass was easily identifiable because it consisted primarily of the poor, foreign immigrants, and freed blacks. This isolation of the dangerous classes as the embodiment of the crime problem created a focus in crime control that persists even to this day. The idea that policing should be directed toward bad individuals rather than social and economic conditions that are criminogenic in their social outcomes, right? So what they did was they made sure that they identified poor, right, the unemployed, right, immigrants, right, and free blacks as criminals. This is the narrative that they put out there. This is the criminal class. These are the people that you need to be scared of. This is why you need a police force to keep everything in order from these people. Nothing has changed.
They created the fear, fear mongering.
Nothing has changed.
Nothing's changed. It's just fear.
So check this out. This is a great article. I'm gonna share the link when I'm done. In addition, the creation of the modern police force in the United States also immutably altered the definition of the police function. Policing had always been a reactive enterprise, occurring only in response to a specific criminal act. Centralized and bureaucratic police departments focusing on the alleged crime-producing qualities of the dangerous classes began to emphasize preventive crime control. The presence of police authorized to use force could stop crime before it started by subjecting everyone to surveillance and observation. The concept of the police patrol as a preventive control mechanism routinized the insertion of police into the normal daily events of everyone's life, a previously unknown and feared concept in both England and the United States. Right?
Previously feared.
Right.
Right. They didn't fear it anymore. It's accepted.
Right, because over the years they've pound us in the head with this idea of respecting authority, right? Again, I've been reading for almost 20 minutes and nowhere does it say that the police are here to protect the common citizen, right? It's even stated by law that the police are not obligated to protect you. We'll get into that later, but I got a lot of information.
That's just mind-blowing right there. You're right.
You know what I'm saying?
20 minutes.
Early American police departments shared two primary characteristics. They were notoriously corrupt and flagrantly brutal. I'm going to repeat that. Early American police departments shared two primary characteristics. They were notoriously corrupt and flagrantly brutal. This should come as no surprise that the police were under the control of local politicians. The local political party ward leader in most cities appointed the police executive in charge of the ward leader's neighborhood. The ward leader also most often was the neighborhood tavern owner. Sometimes the neighborhood purveyor of gambling and prostitution, and usually the controlling influence over the neighborhood youth gangs who were used to get out the vote and intimidate opposition party voters. In this system of vice, organized violence, and political corruption, it is inconceivable that the police could be anything but corrupt. Police systematically took payoffs to allow illegal drinking, gambling, and prostitution. Police organized professional criminals like thieves and pickpockets, trading immunity for bribes or information. It sounds a lot like when they working with an informant, right? When you give an informant a bribe for information, right? You are working with an informant, right? He's giving you information
The
about crime,
snitch. The snitch.
and you're trading a bribe. Nothing has changed, right? They actively participated in vote buying and ballot box stuffing, right? The same voting system that y'all still have faith in today is clearly telling you here that the police departments were actively involved in manipulating the voting process. But y'all still go out there and tell people to vote, right? That is legit, that we've evolved as humanity, right? And I'm clearly showing you that nothing has changed. Nothing. Here we go. They actively participated in vote buying and ballot box stuffing. Loyal political operatives became police officers. They had no discernible qualifications for policing and little, if any, training in policing. Promotions within the police departments were sold, not earned. Police drank while on patrol. They protected their patrons' vice operations, and they were quick to use preemptory force. Walker goes on so far to call municipal police delegated vigilantes, entrusted with the power to use overwhelming force against dangerous classes as a means of deterring criminality.
I love how they add the quotation mark. Dangerous.
So, I mean, here you have it plain as day. I mean, and I'm going to put the article in here. It really talks about the labor force and stuff. But I don't want to get into the concept of police brutality itself, right? Because this is just a small percentage of the history of law enforcement, right? And this is to take nothing away of all the good things they did. I'm not here to really slander police, but I'm giving you an objective history of what police in America was created for. And none of it entailed protecting the common citizen, right? So let's continue on. Let's go to the next article, right? You can put my screen up right here, Paul. All right, this article right here is called The Racist Roots of American Policing from Slave Patrol to Traffic Stops. I'm going to try not to be redundant here and go and pass over the things that I already talked about. But we're going to talk about the Jim Crow laws, right? Slave patrols were formally dissolved after the Civil War ended, but formerly enslaved people saw little relief from racist government policies as they promptly became subject to black codes. And before I get a little bit deeper in here, we're going to look at what black codes are, right? And pig laws, right? Immediately after the Civil War ended, Southern states enacted black codes that allow African Americans certain rights, such as legalized marriage, ownership of property, and limited access to the courts, but denied them the rights to testify against whites, to serve on juries or in state militias, vote, or start a job without the approval of the previous employer. These codes were all repealed in 1866 when Reconstruction began. But after the failure of Reconstruction in 1877 and the removal of black men from political office, Southern states again enacted a series of laws intended to circumscribe the lives of African Americans. Harsh contract laws penalized anyone attempting to leave a job before an advance had been worked off. Pig laws unfairly penalized poor African Americans for crimes such as stealing a farm animal. And vagrancy statutes made it a crime to be unemployed. Many misdemeanors or trivial offenses were treated as felonies with harsh sentences and fines. The pig laws stayed on the books for decades and were expanded with even more discriminatory laws once the Jim Crow era began, right? So right now we're going to watch a short video, and we're going to get a better understanding of what these black codes were.
But even after African Americans began to be a part of the political process, the state legislatures of the South passed more and more and more restrictive measures which were effectively designed to criminalize black life, to make it essentially impossible for any African American man who didn't live under the explicit protection of some white landowner to not be in violation of some law at almost all times. And the kinds of things we're talking about are absurd to modern ears, but it was a crime in the South for a farm worker to walk beside a railroad. It was a crime in the South to speak loudly in the company of white women. It was a crime to sell the products of your farm after dark, almost anywhere in the South. There were reasons, there were sort of odd logics behind almost all of these laws, and none of them said that they applied exclusively to African Americans. But overwhelmingly, they were only ever enforced against African Americans because the explicit intent When I say the intent was explicit, it was. In the Constitutional Convention of Alabama in 1901, when a new constitution was passed, which effectively ended all black participation in political life and public life in Alabama, the discussions around the drafting of these laws were very open about the intention to make it impossible for black men to participate in mainstream American life in any meaningful way. But the most powerful, the most damaging of all of these laws were the vagrancy statutes, where in every southern state it became a crime, or you became a criminal, if you could not prove at any given moment that you were employed. What white Southerners then discovered was that this was also an extraordinarily effective way of intimidating African Americans away from the new civil rights they had obtained as a result of the 13th Amendment and the end of the Civil War. These laws passed to force them back into labor also intimidated them away from the political process, or could be used to intimidate them away from the political process. And so by the end of the 19th century, on the basis of these two strategies of white Southerners, enormous populations of African Americans had been returned to a state of de facto slavery and had been effectively pushed completely, entirely out of the political process, and they would not return for 6 decades.
And that's out of the mouth of a white man, right? So that hit you even, because this is not even, we can't even make the argument that, right, that is a pro-black or a black man saying this and that he's biased. This is a white man who did his due diligence, his research, right, and objectively gave you the history of how law enforcement and the legislative branch of this government worked to keep generations and generations and generations of minorities and immigrants in situations of poverty and slavery. So let's look at the 13th Amendment, right? Because the 13th Amendment is a real slick amendment, right? Let's look at this, because I want to show you guys something, and I want to show you how there's a lot of power in words and how you don't even catch on to things, right? So now, in the last video we just seen, the man was telling you that they were enforcing all these new laws, right, and legislation to criminalize being black, right? And what does that do? When you criminalize a certain demographic of people, be it immigrants or blacks or whatever, right? What does this do? The 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States that formally abolished slavery, right? So right away they hit you with this fancy wording like they abolished slavery, but peep the wording here. Although the words slavery and slave are never mentioned in the Constitution, the 13th Amendment abrogated these sections of the Constitution which had tactically codified the peculiar institution. Article 1, Section 2, regarding apportionment of representation in the House of Representatives, which had been determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons provided for the appointment, with all other persons meaning slaves, right? So slaves weren't even considered a whole person. They were 3/5 of an individual, right? So you needed 2 slaves to constitute 1 person. Article 1, Section 9, which had established in 1807 as the end date for the importation of slaves, referred to in this case as such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit. And Article 4, Section 2, which mandated the return to their owners of fugitive slaves, here defined as persons held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another. Now here's the little slick wording about the 13th Amendment that most people don't catch, right? Because a lot of people think that the 13th Amendment establishes that we are free. That's not necessarily what it does. It establishes that legally, yes, slavery is not legal, right? But here's what it says. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except, okay, this is the key word here, except, right? As a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Okay? So it's saying here that slavery or involuntary servitude, except when you've been convicted of a crime. Okay? So anybody that's ever been convicted of a crime, you lose that right. You no longer had the right to be protected from slavery and involuntary servitude. That's why when you go to prison, you working for 5 cents a day, 10 cents a day, because slavery is legal under the 13th Amendment, right? So how does that affect us minorities, right? Well, they make being a minority a criminal act. We've seen they did this over history, over time. They made being a minority being a criminal, right? They took us out of political office, right? Anytime that we tried to build our own economic systems, they come and they sabotage it, right? So what other methods did they use, right, to set us back? So check this out. A lot of people might not know this, but this is how the legislative branch of the government, right, works to keep us oppressed. Plessy versus Ferguson. This is a law case from 1896, right? So this is 23 years after Reconstruction. Plessy versus Ferguson is a legal case in which the U.S. Supreme Court on May 18, 1896, by a 7-1 majority, advanced a controversial separate but equal doctrine for assessing the constitutionality of racial segregation laws. Plessy versus Ferguson was the first major inquiry into the meaning of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which prohibits the states from denying equal protection of the laws to any person within their jurisdictions. Although the majority opinion did not contain the phrase separate but equal, it gave constitutional sanction to laws designed to achieve racial segregation by means of separate and supposedly equal public facilities and services for African Americans and whites. It served as a controlling judicial precedent until it was overturned by the Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas in 1950. Right? So, like, what was the whole idea of this, right? They were challenging the very idea that the states were able to integrate races, right? They were challenging the very idea that the states even had that power, and they took it to the Supreme Court. That's how bent out of shape these people was at that time, that they were willing to go to the Supreme Court. And they won, right? They won because the laws in this country are already written, right, to serve a certain agenda. And once you understand that, you don't be surprised. When you look back at history, none of this should surprise you. Everything that's going on now, none of it should surprise you, right? Because if you understand why this country was built, the philosophical tenets that was used to build this country, right, none of this should surprise you. So let's look at the background a little bit of this case. The case originated in 1892 as a challenge to Louisiana's Separate Car Act. The law required that all railroads operating in the state provide equal but separate accommodations for white and African American passengers and prohibited passengers from entering accommodations other than those to which they had been assigned on the basis of their race. In 1891, a group of Creole professionals in New Orleans formed the Citizens Committee to test the constitutionality of the separate car law. They hired Albion Torgy, a Reconstruction-era judge and social reformer, as their legal counsel. As plaintiff in the test case, the committee chose a person of mixed race in order to support its contention that the law could not be consistently applied because it failed to define the white and colored races, right? Homer Plessy, who was 7/8 white and 1/8 African American, purchased a rail ticket for travel within Louisiana and took a seat in a car reserved for white passengers. The state Supreme Court had ruled earlier that the law cannot be applied to interstate travel. After refusing to move to a car for African Americans, he was arrested and charged with violating the Separate Car Act. At Plessy's trial in U.S. District Court, Judge John H. Ferguson dismissed his contention that the act was unconstitutional. After the state Supreme Court affirmed the district court's ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court granted certiorari and oral judgments were heard on April 13, 1896. The court rendered its decision one month later on May 18th. Right? So we could see that for a long time, this is something that they were willing to go to court for, right? This guy is trying to make a case that, you know, he's 7/8 white. And that 1/8 black was enough to get him kicked out of the car. Think about that for a minute, right? You 7/8 white, that 1/8 that they can't even identify, right?
DNA wasn't even
to get you kicked out the car and get you sent to prison and go to the Supreme Court.
They act like they was doing DNA generational.
Yeah,
they wasn't tracking none of that then.
So let's look at Jim Crow itself, right? Let's look at the whole concept of Jim Crow, because Jim Crow wasn't just one; it was a whole idea of system. Some of the things that I'm talking about now were all part of the Jim Crow structure. But let's define what Jim Crow was, right? In U.S. history, any of the laws that enforced racial segregation in the South between the end of Reconstruction in 1877 and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s. Jim Crow was the name of a minstrel routine performed beginning in 1828 by its author, Thomas Dartmouth Daddy Rice, and by many imitators, including actor Joseph Jefferson. The term came to be a derogatory epithet for African Americans and a designation for their segregated life, right? From the late 1870s, Southern state legislators, no longer controlled by so-called carpetbaggers and freemen, passed laws requiring the separation of whites from persons of color in public transportation and schools. Generally, anyone of ascertainable or strongly suspected black ancestry in any degree for that purpose was a person of color. The pre-Civil War distinction favoring those whose ancestry was known to be mixed, particularly the half-French, free persons of color in Louisiana, was abandoned. The segregation principle was extended to parks, cemeteries, theaters, and restaurants in an effort to prevent any contact between blacks and whites as equals. It was codified on local and state levels, and most famously with the separate but equal decision of the U.S. Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson, right? So we just talked about Plessy versus Ferguson, right?
Right.
So this is deep here, right? They put the whole concept of racism, they made it law in this country. So, like, y'all be surprised when y'all see racism is so prevalent in this country. This country was built in its laws on racism. And this is something that we still haven't came to understand yet, right? So we gave a little brief history of the police force, right? Of how they were built to maintain the policy of the ruling elite. It was never about protecting the people, right? It was never about protecting the common good. It was always about protecting the what's the term? The infrastructure, right?
The city,
and the state, and to ensure that the people in power stay in power and they keep you under control, right? So let me see if I can find what I'm looking for real quick, and then I don't know how much time we got left.
Got about 15 minutes.
All right, so we're gonna open up the chat in a minute, and I want some of y'all to talk about your experience with police brutality. Have you ever experienced police brutality? Have you ever experienced this this level of corruption that exists? I know me personally. I've experienced numerous events that I would consider police brutality, and I'm not gonna go out here and I'm not gonna be a hypocrite and say I didn't deserve some of them, right? Some of them ass whoopings I totally deserved because I was completely out of pocket, right? But some of them I didn't, right? And some of the evidence that was fabricated against me didn't deserve to be fabricated because there was plenty of things they could have arrested me for that I did do, right? But there's a lot of people that go through this. There's a lot of people that go through this whole experience of police brutality and they never get the opportunity to express what it is that they experience. So before I open up the Discord, I want to read this article from the New York Times. And basically what it says here, justices rule police do not have a constitutional duty to protect someone. And this was June 28, 2005. Okay, this is 15 years ago. The Supreme Court ruled on Monday that the police did not have a constitutional duty to protect a person from harm, even a woman who had obtained a court-issued protective order against a violent husband, making an arrest mandatory for a violation. The decision, with an opinion by Justice Scalia and dissents from Justices Paul Stevens, Ruth Bader, overturned a ruling by Federal Appeals Court in Colorado. The Appeals Court had permitted a lawsuit to proceed against a Colorado town, Castle Rock, for the failure of the police to respond to a woman's pleas for help after her estranged husband violated a protective order by kidnapping their 3 young daughters, whom he eventually killed.
Oh, man.
For hours on the night of June 22nd, 1999, Jessica Gonzalez tried to get the Castle Rock police to find and arrest her estranged husband, Simon Gonzalez, who was under a court order to stay 100 yards away from the house. He had taken the children, ages 7, 9, and 10, as they played outside, and he later called his wife to tell her that he had the girls at an amusement park in Denver. Ms. Gonzalez conveyed the information to the police, but they failed to act before Mr. Gonzalez arrived at the police station hours later, firing a gun with the bodies of the girls in the back of his truck. The police killed him at the scene. The theory of the lawsuit Ms. Gonzalez filed in federal district court in Denver was that Colorado law had given her an enforceable right to protection by instructing the police on the court order that you shall arrest or issue a warrant for the arrest of a violator. She argued that the order gave her property interest within the meaning of the 14th Amendment's due process guarantee, which prohibits the deprivation of property without due process. The district court and panel of the United States Court of Appeals for the 10th Circuit dismissed the lawsuit, but the full appeals court reinstated it and the town appealed. The Supreme Court's precedents made the appellate ruling a challenging one for Ms. Gonzalez and her lawyers to sustain. Okay? So this is something that, okay, again, the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land. Okay, you have a state Supreme Court and you have a federal Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is the highest law, right? So, the way things work is you take things through your regular local courts, your common pleas courts, right? And then that gets sent up to appeal courts, and then after it goes to appeal courts, it gets sent up to Supreme Courts, right? This is a case that made it all the way up to the top level, and they ruled. Now it went back to an appeal process, right? But they said legally that they don't have a constitutional duty to protect anybody from harm, constitutionally.
Right. It's not even, they don't.
Law.
We're
Constitution
here
is the law of the land.
to protect property, business, infrastructure, and whoever pays me to, do something.
Right, because when we go back in the article, we see that, right, the whole idea of policing was a reactive, right? And then they enacted this preventive method of policing by identifying people that were criminals before they did a crime. Those black people over there, those are the criminals. Those Irish people coming off the boat, those are the criminals, right? So they made sure that they had an outlet, right, and a narrative to feed the people, to make sure that they always had an idea. Look, these people are the criminals. These are the people that we coming to get, right? So we see that the history of policing is very flawed, right? Now, what is policing now? How much has modern policing changed now, right? Because we look every day and we see videos of people being shot, right, by police officers. Whether they deserve it or not is irrelevant. It's the fact that if you're a police officer and you're trained to deal, right, you're trained to deal with criminals, right, and you got all this body armor, right? Most of the time when they pull up to the scene, they're pulling up with like 2, 3, 4 other people, right? These guys spend an incredible amount of hours at the gym, right, drinking supplements and creatine and doing push-ups.
At least
right?
they're supposed to.
But the minute somebody gets a little bit rambunctious, right, they feel the need to pull out a gun and shoot them dead. Well, what's the point in lifting weights? What's the point of doing all the exercise?
Right.
So, and maybe I'm being a little bit facetious, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm a little bit biased. But you understand the drift of what I'm trying to say. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, firefighters have a certain physical conditioning that they need to stay in shape to be able to save people's lives, right? But these guys don't. Their initial design was not to save people's lives. That's their initial design, was to only protect property and such else. That's pretty much what is the bottom line of it. It's crazy.
And what's even more, the irony in all of this is that the response to police brutality is more police brutality, right? Because, these people that are rioting and stuff, yeah, some of the rioters are paid instigators, right? So some of these people that you see, and we talked about this with the psychological operations episode, that yes, some of these people in these protests, right, are paid instigators. Some of these people in the protests that are rioting are police officers. right? Some of these people that are protesting are anarchists and people that don't care about the Constitution. There's a large different elements of people that are in these protests.
Right.
This is why labeling people just because you see a protest that's Black Lives Matter, everybody that's at that protest might not necessarily be affiliated with the whole Black Lives Matter movement. They might be there for their own personal agenda, right? Me personally, I don't really get caught up in anything that's politically oriented, right? I live outside of that political paradigm. I judge things individually, but you know, a lot of these things that we're seeing on television right now is just to add more divide and to keep us at each other's necks and to keep us, you know, always fighting about what side is right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I challenge, right, anybody that's in law enforcement to do an objective history into the history of law enforcement and tell me what you find about law enforcement, right? And look at the history of law enforcement for yourself. Don't take my word for it, right? Don't take the article's word for it. Do an objective research into the history of law enforcement for yourself, and you're gonna find the very same things that I told you today.
What was the name of that book again?
This is an article, so I'm gonna put the article in the chat, right? The history of policing in the United States. So this is peer reviewed, right?
Right. I got it up there. They see it.
You got it in the chat?
Yeah. Well, no, not in the chat, but they get to see it.
All right, so do me a favor. If you could put that in the chat. I'm not in the Discord chat right now.
They got to see it.
I'm in here right now. Hold up. Just put it in the chat, right? And not only that, but I'm going to give you all these links for everything because, again, I'm on an hour time. I'm already like a minute over.
No, you had the cushion. You got a little bit of cushion because we started.
So I'm going to open up the Discord real quick. If anybody has any comments that they want to share, let me know so we can get you on. And, you know, going to do it like that.
The Discord link is shared in the chat already, too.
I'm putting links in the chat now. So if anybody's in the Discord chat, you could go in the Discord chat and you could get links to all these articles right now. And you could basically go over this information yourself. Because the one thing about me, I don't never tell nobody to believe me. I did the due diligence and research and did what I had to do to find this information, right? And in all honesty, I be leaving a lot out, man. There's only so much that I could say in a public forum. You know, I try to be sensitive to people's bias and you know, things that are going on. But at the end of the day, it's about the truth. I really don't care about feelings at the end of the day, man. It's about the truth. And the truth of the matter is that the police system was created, right, as a system of oppression. Now, whether you want to believe that or not, that's on you. You know what I'm saying? The information, the objective information that here about this subject is going to say that, though. And these are coming from people that have no, you know, they don't come from the same environment that I come from. These are people that never lived in the inner city, and they're saying the same thing. You know, maybe I'm a little bit biased because I live in the inner city, right? But a lot of these people that are writing these articles are people that never got beat up by the police, right? These are people that never been to prison. And they're saying the same exact thing I'm saying. Why is that? Because the truth is the truth. It doesn't matter where you get it from. The truth is always going to be the truth. You know what I'm saying?
I got Chino who joined in, but I'm not sure if he wants to speak yet or not.
I don't know. Type in it. Can you hear me?
I gave him an invite.
Right.
He'll join if you'd like to speak.
We'll try to get people in here. You know, whoever want to share their experience with police brutality, right? I didn't really want to waste my time showing videos of police brutality because
we already have enough of that shit.
You guys already seen that. And I'm not going to continue the psychological operation of divide and conquer by showing you images of something that you already seen 1,000 times. But what I am going to do is give you an objective history of what it is, right, that we trying to fight against, right? And you see that the policing system itself is inherently racist. That's another thing that we just gloss over, right? It's an inherently racist system. And what is racism? Racism, it comes from a position of power, right? See, one of the biggest misconceptions, like one of the counter arguments for racism is the idea of reverse racism, right? Well, black people can't be racist in America because they are not in a position of authority. You understand? Now, Idi Amin, when he was the president of Uganda, he was practiced racism. Why? Because he was in a position of power where he could subjugate white people and oppress white people. He was in a position of power to do that. So at the very most, the only thing that a person of color could be here in America is prejudice. But they could never be racist because they don't have any power to be racist.
Yo, Mulatto Mitch can join in.
But once you understand that and you learn the definitions, and it might make your counter arguments and rebuttals make a little bit more sense. You know what I'm saying? So, do we got anybody on the mic?
No,
Nobody's on the mic.
That's okay, but they're sharing
Okay,
some
that's
in
cool.
chat.
Let them, yeah. Like Ms. Scoville said, police brutality isn't just physical. That's absolutely correct. It's a psychological operation. The whole concept of showing a man getting choked out on TV for 8 minutes and 46 seconds is a psychological operation. Right? It's a psychological operation. And the whole psychological operation behind that, the idea that they're trying to accomplish is to remind you that you don't have no power on you. It's to remind you we got our foot on your neck. That's what the whole symbology behind that is. You know what I'm saying? And, I know a lot of people in the inner cities, right, that dealt with this, I remember vividly, I remember back in our days when we was on the blocks, they used to come pick us up. They drive us around the neighborhoods, right? And neighborhoods that they knew that the dudes ain't like us to make it look like we was snitching, right? And they'll pull up right there in front of you and be like, hey, this dude right here in the back seat, he's snitching. Now, if one of these dudes come back and kill you, right, you're dead. Your life is over with. You can't come back from that shit. And these cops, they playing with your life like it's a game, man.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or when they used to tie us up behind Family Dollar or handcuff us to the car and drive around the circle and parking lot and drive around in the circle in the parking lot, throw people in the dumpsters. This is what they do. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So that's why it's hard for us to find empathy and sympathy for law enforcement officers sometimes, right? Because we know what they do behind closed doors when they're not under the watchful eye of their supervisors. Right. And then when you're dealing with somebody like me that understands the history of law enforcement, right? And then you sit in here defending something. Like, that's like the biggest smack in the face when I see people of color, right? Not understanding that, dude.
It's all designed to keep that.
Look at you.
That knee on your neck.
Cooning. That's what it is. It's cooning, man. That's what it is. I would never support something. I could never support something that oppressed my ancestors, bro. Never. I could never do that. And this is why I got out of the drug game, because I realized that was the same system of oppression. We was working for the police. You buy your first and your last kilo from a police officer. A lot of people don't realize this, right? But the police and the government, those are the matter of fact, next episode is going to be about this. So Sunday, tap in, because I'm going to talk about the drug trade, and I'm going to explain to you how the police, right? Because this is a two episode series called Crime and Punishment, right? And Sunday, I'm going to show you how the American government, in cahoots with the rest of the other governments around the world, manufacture the drug trade, right, to make sure that the inner cities and urban environments always had a supply of drugs, always had a supply of guns, to make sure that ensures job security. And I'm going to show you how all of this correlates with the private prison system. So make sure Sunday y'all tap in, 12 o'clock. I'm going a little bit early because it's football. You know what I'm saying? But we going to go in right before the Browns kick off. We going all the way in. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, I'm going to wrap this up because I'm starting to get a little bit hot, man. I start talking about this shit and I get charged up, man, and I got to chill because I don't want to get my channel blocked. But, yeah, man, I'm about to go in. I'm just going to keep exposing the truth for what it is, man, because it's like, every time I get into conversations with people, I understand people got their biases towards things, I'm not in the habit of trying to convince you of anything. I'm going to show you what it is, and then you decide what you want to do with that information. You know what I'm saying? Matter of fact, I'm gonna see if I bring in some of the peoples that been through the prison system so they could tell you their experience. I'm gonna make sure I get a little panel. So if you out there and you've been in the prison system and you want to share your story of what you experienced, contact me immediately. I'll have you on the show Sunday morning, and we could talk about your experience and how the prison system is another psychological event to traumatize, you know what I'm saying? And with that being said, we shouldn't be out here committing crimes. I'm not out here saying that we should be out here committing crimes and we shouldn't be doing none of that shit. You know what I'm saying? I will never endorse criminal activity. But there's a lot of people in prison that are not criminals, right? There's a lot of people in prison that were wrongfully convicted, right? There's a lot of men in jail for rapes they never did. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of things going on within the law enforcement, and this is just the legislative branch, right? The judicial system. It's a lot of corruption, and we need to air all of it out. We need to air all of it out. You know what I'm saying? All of it. So with that being said, I want to thank all of y'all for tapping in today, man. This was a show that I really wanted to get off my chest. Again, man, like, you know, an hour time, I'm very limited on what I could do, and I really feel like I really, you know, but that's okay, because Sunday I'm gonna go a little bit deeper, and we're really gonna talk about, we're gonna get a little bit more intimate with it, how this affects the home, and how this how, you know, when you lock a man, imagine what that does to a community, man. When you take the man out of the community, right? Think about the black community, the Puerto Rican community, and think about all our family members and brothers and uncles that are locked up, and what it did to the family structure when they went to jail, right? And think about what it did when those family members died or they got killed, what it did, right? The women that had to go on raising the kids by themselves, and the kids that had to grow up without a father because he's locked up for 25 years, 35 years, right? Or he's dead, killed by the police, or killed by something that he did himself because he's living in a community that's just filled with crime and poverty, right? Crime and poverty that is controlled by the policing system. Again, because we already established that it was never about stopping crime. It was always about controlling it and keeping it out of the white communities. If you want to know the truth, the police are there to keep the crime out of the white communities and keep it contained within the urban environment. How you love that? With that being said, I want y'all to take it easy. Make sure y'all show some love, you know what I'm saying? I got production costs, you know what I'm saying? Each one of these shows cost me a little couple dollars, man. So, you know, I appreciate any support that I could get. You know, if I got 50 people watching and you send $1, that take care of one episode. You know what I'm saying? And really, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get the show to take care of itself. You know, I don't want this to become a liability because then I have to do less shows. You know, this is how things work. But, you know, I thank y'all for the support, man. I thank all of y'all that been patient with me over time. You know what I'm saying? I thank all of y'all that, you know, offer me words of encouragement. You know, again, everybody over the course of the years that's ever did anything to help me out, you know, motivate me. You know what I'm saying? You gave me $1 out of your pocket. I appreciate that. You know what I'm saying? And part of the reason why I do what I do here on this show is to show my appreciation. You know what I'm saying? So, with that being said, I'll see y'all Sunday. We're going to do an early show Sunday because I don't want to interfere with the football game. And we're probably going to be doing Sunday shows a little bit earlier from now on. So with that being said, I'll see y'all Sunday and peace out.